Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. I'm going to talk a bit about sidekicks. In the last D&D campaign I had ran that had lasted of any length, I'd started it off using the Essentials kit the day after I bought it, and over time kind of started weaving my own stuff into it. But from the get-go, I was curious to try out the sidekick dynamics. And through my experimentation, I guess I have some advice and tips on how to use them. I also feel that the concept works well with other kind of games too, especially games that like have a higher danger threshold and you have a smaller player group. So to have a little additional backup when going into combat encounters and all that other kind of stuff, or a need for special skills that none of the players have because they didn't take those kinds of character classes. Sidekicks can help fill in a lot of blanks. The key is that they're not a second character. What I like to do is to in terms of what the sidekick as an NPC knows and how they will respond to character questions and all that other kind of stuff I leave that and operate that like a regular NPC. But in terms of the tactical control of that NPC's stats and how it's used in combat situations, I'll cede that to whichever player wants to have control over that sidekick in any given scenario. I don't necessarily like have it be permanently partnered, like this character has this sidekick, unless there's some in-game story narrative reason why they go together. Generally, I think they should be used to be switched in and out. Over time, players become more attached to them, especially, in part because those sidekick NPCs will kind of siphon some of the XP points that they've been getting in their encounters. And so after a time, you want to keep developing this one because you've already dumped so much XP loss into it in order to get it to level 2 that, it gives the players a rules-based subconscious reason to want to stick to some sidekicks and keep going back to them. But they should be encountering optional sidekicks in most places they go that are important to whatever the overall adventure narrative is. Use them as something that can be unlocked, almost like in a way like you see in some video games like Elder Scrolls, where sometimes some sidekicks might be available just because they're mercenary and you got the coin and they'll follow along and help you fight the thing in the cave kind of types. Good for the warrior type experts. Sidekicks. Types of characters they might befriend and win over to their side. NPCs that have a shared common cause, that have a reason to want to go along just for this one mission or set of missions. All that kind of stuff make good excuses to have NPCs that suddenly the players are more invested in because they're helping to control them, and they feel like a second character to them, even though they don't get to speak for them. Also, in case of character death, the sidekicks are a good immediate standby, so that the player can still be participating in what's going on, because they just to take full control of the sidekick, even though they don't still necessarily know what all that sidekick knows, and they would still be encouraged to make a new character as opposed to just completely taking over the sidekick as their own player character. But because of how sidekicks are designed, it's real easy to just switch them over to a standard class, and boom, you got your replacement character right there on hand. I find they're really great for cold opens. If you're in the middle of some ongoing stuff, and your player characters into the last session, they're in the woods traveling to wherever, and so the next session's going to start off with, well, they're just off in the woods, and unless you have some dumb made up reason why a bunch of kobolds come roaring out of the forest to attack them at their camp right when they first wake up at dawn. It could lead to kind of a boring, you're exactly where you left off, so I guess you're going to keep walking through the woods, right? That's kind of a lame opening. But if there's sidekick characters that they have met and used and are, back behind, they didn't come along with them on what they're currently doing, or if there's sidekicks that they haven't yet met or realized that they were potentially unlockable sidekick characters, you can have an action-packed starting cold open that's the characters get to control some sidekick characters. The players get to control some sidekick characters just for the scene, and it's just to like show that like, oh my God, some sort of nefarious stuff is going on back at the town, while we're away, trying to find the mountain, kind of a scenario going on. That the players, as the audience, get to have this tension the entire time now that their characters are dicking around on this mission, that all this horrible stuff is going back in the town, especially if you don't do it too often, just to imply that something bad's happening, but that you don't then just keep showing them scene after scene, yet they have to wait the entire time it takes them to finish what they're doing and then get all the way back to town to then discover, what has transpired. Optionally, also, you could use that as a way to have one of the sidekicks come out and fetch the player characters to bring them back prematurely in case, because they hadn't fully finished some earlier scenario. It has allowed some evil to be unleashed on NPCs they have come to care about. And like I said, as players over time start to realize that this is going on and that different NPCs could potentially become companion-type characters, at least in brief, they become kind of, more invested in NPCs in general and more interested in trying to be, make friends with them. Sometimes this might lead to you like, oh, well, this actually on the fly might actually make a good companion character because this seems, all just natural to how the storyline is evolving. And you just throw in the basic template and you're good to go. In the Essentials kit game I ran, I found the players were like so attached to one of their sidekicks, Pickled Pete, who I had made into a gnome. He was like their guide to get them to the little gnome town on the side of the mountain where there's like the mimic loose in the halls or some sort of thing like that. It's basically the Thing with gnomes, but because they're all paranoid of everything now and each other. And on the way back, they encountered Cryovane, and instead of like having them try to fight Cryovane at such an early level, I just decided to like cheap out and had Cryovane just snatch the gnome off the back of their cart and fly away. Which I felt like, it shows them the sting of Cryovane without wiping out the party because they rolled a Cryovane encounter that early on into the game. So they were like so touched by all that, they actually like gave Pickled Pete a funeral. Where like, a Viking funeral where like we burned his character sheet and the Pickled Pete card. Like, that just, like I said, that just kind of like, even though they're not their character and that they don't control that character's feelings or mind, or they don't know what all that character's history is, because of that little touch of them being something that they do get to be invested in and control, they just have that extra level of attachment. That, it's like like I said, it's like right on the same level of losing a beloved longtime player character, and they'd only had him around for like a session or two when all that happened. So, like this, specifically with D&D, like like I was saying, the warriors, they're kind of good for your mercenary types. They can kind of wiggle into a lot of different warrior concept occupations. In terms of what kind of NPCs they are, anything from blacksmith all the way up to a knight or even a noble, depending on what kind of noble flavor you're going with. Experts are not just like a replacement for thieves and bards, but like they're also the scholars, sages, any kind of person with some sort of specific knowledge, expertise. From having watched it, they are the least helpful in combat, which is ironic since their signature move is having helpful as an action. Which I guess just gives advantage to another player, which is kind of cool, but like they still get snuffed pretty easily, and they don't actually deliver any good, striking power. Let's say when it comes down to like the bare, facts of like, it's all well and good that I get to roll 2 die 20, but we still need to take this thing's hit points down fast before it kills us all, kind of situations. The magic users, they're most handy if you're going with the divine variant of the magic user sidekick, in large part because despite their longtime presence, I almost never actually encounter people who want to play clerics, and so that while to me it was like a critical flaw of 4th edition D&D is like how particularly wed that version's classes were to like having to have other classes in the group with varying abilities in order to be able to actually have a balanced group at all. Like if you don't have a healer, your group is like not going to have a good time in 4th edition. And 5th edition kind of also has like hints of that. It's not as bad, but it's also like makes it a bit more unrealistic in terms of how much you heal overnight in D&D. But because of stuff like that, and you're still keeping around like short rests and all that kind of stuff and healing surges, you know, like 5th edition is a lot easier to survive. So you don't need the cleric as much. So there's less incentive to have to play one as a player just out of obligation. And just like I said, I know they have their fans. I just personally almost have never run into them. Like maybe only a couple times have I known anyone who wants to play a cleric. People who want to play religious characters generally want to play druids or paladins. Having though the divine using healing sidekick though allows you to have in the group a healer character. That's kind of just like, you know, side note. The players don't have to feel like too troubled to have to like manage them. They can just keep them in the background during a fight and be there to just to cast their healing stuff as and when necessary. And you know, as just kind of like a general mode of template that applies to like other games fairly well. Star Trek Adventures kind of has sidekick characters in it too, and the way that you can like bring in crew NPCs to use, depending on the size of your ship. That your main player characters are stationed on board. I feel like it would be actually really handy to Rifts, and I'm kind of experimenting a little bit with what I'm doing with my wife, just giving her kind of like a tour of Rifts in game kind of thing, where it's not like out to necessarily solve the mystery or defeat the monster. It's just more to like a way to like learn about what the hell this setting is without just it being just nothing but a gigantic information dump in text that, you know, amidst all the various things people have to read. It's just another thing to read. Oh my God. I mean, like, there's advantages to having sidekick systems in a lot of games, down to and including that they siphon off some of the XP that your character would have otherwise been rewarded. It's just like with some games that don't have that built in, you gotta decide on yourself what the exact dynamic is, and do you want to have a simplified version of the NPC, or do you want to have to actually take the time, like say if you are going to have sidekicks and Rifts or Palladium Fantasy or something like that, are you actually going to stat out the entire thing like you would with a player character, or is it just going to be a shorthand version of its stats that's mostly just handy for when you're in combat situations, because the players aren't going to be dealing with controlling their skills and stuff like that. Except maybe for the rolling itself, but you won't necessarily tell them they wouldn't necessarily know what the target percentage is. You're just going to tell them whether or not they fail. I mean, there's a lot of, especially like I was saying, like if you have a smaller group, if whether or not just because of limitations of the amount of players you can get a hold of, or if you're like me and just prefer smaller groups of 2 or 3 people, sidekicks are good because they help give you the rounded out, balanced player character group without having the players actually having to play 2 characters at once. They're just controlling them in combat situations, and otherwise they're just NPCs that are just there that they can ask questions of or asked to go do tasks and stuff within the limitations of whatever made that NPC agree to be their sidekick. So it's with some of them, it's not like a permanent forever. You're going to have this sidekick the entire game. Like they're only going to be involved until X, whether it's you run out of money or you've defeated the thing or you saved the thing. So I don't know, yeah, tie all that up and use that as you will. Be sure to leave comments below, hit like and subscribe, and as always, stay waspinated.